After decades of ethnic tension and then war, Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008. The move was partially recognized by the international community, with the US and most European countries as allies, but it remains a diplomatic problem with its neighbour Serbia and with its powerful backer Russia. In June last year, opposition leader Albin Kurti, seen by many as a radical reformer, came to power. He was expected to be the fresh start the people of Kosovo needed to turn the page after so many years not just of conflict but also of corruption and poverty. Kurti gained recognition as a student leader, protesting against Serbian leader Slobodana Milošević's brutal repression in the 1990s. When NATO decided to take military action against Serbia in 1999, Kurti was in the Kosovan capital Pristina, where he was arrested and sentenced to 15 years in prison. But he was released after almost 3 years following international pressure. As a free man, Kurti became an outspoken opposition politician. Now, as Prime Minister, how is he facing the geopolitical challenges of Kosovo? Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti talks to Al Jazeera. Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of Kosovo, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. I'd like to explain to our viewers a little bit about your background, because you first came to prominence when you were an engineering student and you became a protest leader. And if we look back at the time, 1999, when NATO intervened in your country and the Serbian troops left Kosovo, you weren't there to celebrate because you were actually in a Serbian jail serving a 15-year term. You eventually released after 3 years of that term. How has that experience affected your political outlook?
I think it has affected my life, it has affected my character, but I don't think that my political convictions or world view changed. On 10th of June 1999, when NATO entered Kosovo, over 2,000 Albanian prisoners of war were sent to Serbia and we were kept hostage there. Finally, with the regime change in Serbia, we were released, but not immediately. I was almost a year and a half in prison during period of Milošević, the dictator Milošević, against whose regime NATO intervened. On the other hand, the so-called Democrat, Koštunica, who came after Milošević, held me over 1 year and 3 months in prison. Therefore, the regime change in Serbia, of course, changed many things, but not as many for Serbia as many for us as for Serbia. On the other hand, the democratic regime which followed Milošević in Serbia, led by Zoran Đinđić, ended with the assassination of the latter in the year 2003. Our recent history has been very vivid, but at the same time, I'm one of the people who was very lucky because I'm alive. In Kosovo during 1998 and 1999, around 10,000 civilians were killed, 120,000 houses were burned down, destroyed or damaged, 860,000 Albanians were expelled from Kosovo, over 1 million expelled from their homes, and 20,000 women were raped. And still nowadays we have 1,630 missing persons who have been forcefully taken by Serbia.
Well, you've given us the context of relations between Kosovo and Serbia from your perspective. You, though, have said recently that talks with Serbia are not your top priority. Why?
Well, when we won in elections, we competed with other parties with this idea of jobs and justice. The other thing that we have to take care of is pandemic COVID-19. And I did not say that we are going to neglect it altogether. But if you ask people in Kosovo about their top 10 priorities, dialogue with Serbia is sometimes number 6, sometimes number 7. I said that we made a concession by bringing dialogue as priority number 4, but it cannot enter the top 3 priority because I do not believe that it should be treated like that. And people of Kosovo, when they voted for us as democratic opposition and brought us back into office in the government, they knew what they were doing. So relations with Serbia are important, but Kosovo is an independent country, and among top 3 priorities is not dialogue with Serbia.
It is, though, you know, the top priority as regards the international community, and they will be pushing you to focus on it as they've been pushing all your predecessors. And you know, in the past, there have been efforts at a deal. Go back to 2018, and your former president and the Serbian president came close to a deal involving land swaps, swapping areas with a large Serb population in Kosovo for areas with a Kosovan population in Serbia. You're totally against that idea. Why? Wouldn't it be a lasting solution?
It wouldn't be a solution at all. It would make things worse. And I want democratic solutions, peaceful solutions. And land swap is an approach which will bring us back to the conflicts of the 90s and which would not remain only within the relation between Kosovo and Serbia, but would spread around the Western Balkan 6. I didn't like this way of doing politics where presidents or prime ministers think that they are monarchs in medieval times when they, where they consider territory of the state as if it is their private property and state as such as their own house. So I opposed to this model, which would make things much worse. The project of land swap or territorial exchange definitely has failed, but the idea is not dead, and it's very alive in Belgrade, because all neighboring countries of Belgrade, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, which are not integrated into EU, unfortunately Belgrade considers to be temporary states. And imitating Russian Federation, Serbia wants to strengthen its own factors in the neighborhood as satellite parastates in order to render its neighbors dysfunctional and turn them into failed states. But they have no chance with Republic of Kosovo. Independent Kosovo is here to stay, and we are getting stronger as a state with functioning institutions, with getting out from economic crisis, and by moving forward towards the West, which is something that we never questioned, and where we aspire to join both NATO and EU.
Going forward then, how do you deal with the Serbian minority in your country? There are no exact figures, but it's believed to be about 140,000 people who, if they had their choice, would rather be living in their homes, where they are, but as part of Serbia, not part of Kosovo. What do you do about them?
Majority of Serbs of Kosovo are integrated in our institutions, sometimes also in our society. And I believe that with socioeconomic development, this will improve. It is true that Belgrade doesn't want Serbs to integrate, not only in Kosovo. Belgrade doesn't want Serbs to integrate in Montenegro, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because they want to use them for state and national hegemony. I believe that in Western Balkan 6, in order to have lasting peace and sustainable stability and security, we need all over these 6 countries to have more or less symmetry, sort of a balance or reciprocity of minority rights. Because reciprocity of minority rights will help us all to combat nationalistic and chauvinistic hegemonies which have been characteristic for the Balkans, especially in the last century and a half. Therefore, rule of law against corruption and oligarchs, then democratization against autocracies, facing of the past against war criminals in power, and reciprocity of minority rights are the four elements which will help not only Kosovo and Serbia and the relation of these two, but all these 6 countries. Whenever there are requests from Serbian citizens to me as Prime Minister, I very carefully listen and address them and change the situation for the better. I want to respect the rights of the Serbian citizens just as we respect of the Albanians as majority of people who are like over 92% of the population of Kosovo, and other minorities who are also very well integrated. Roma people, Bosniaks, Turks, Ashkali, and Egyptians, because we do not have only Serb minority. We have 6 different minorities.
Just over a year ago, there was a deal in the White House which was much heralded by the Trump administration as a big breakthrough. It didn't include that land swap idea which had been discussed earlier. What did you make of the Trump administration's approach to Kosovo? Do you think that President Trump and his special envoy, Rick Grenell, really cared much about peace in your country?
That Washington agreement of 4th of September was last year was really unique. There were so different elements in a page and a half. And one of those elements, recognition of Republic of Kosovo by State of Israel, was implemented. But there are other elements in that agreement, like, for example, discussing on sharing a lake, or moratorium on inclusion and membership of Kosovo for international organizations, new railway, highway with Serbia, which one cannot think of them uncritically. However, I think that the main goal of that 4th of September 2020 agreement was for former President of the United States to show that he can make these international deals as quick fixes. And that was only 2 months prior to elections in US. But now is 2021. There is new government in Kosovo. There is new administration in US. Of course, it's very good that we have this recognition from Israel. But I think that previous administration in US was very different from this one, because they were much more into transactional viewpoint of the world, financial and transactional viewpoint. Whereas current President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden, he is very much into transatlantic and transformative.
You talked about the decision with regard to Israel and moving your embassy to Jerusalem. There are those that would say that was a self-serving decision done solely to keep the Trump administration happy and selling out the Palestinians and breaching the binding resolutions of the UN Security Council.
The shifting of the embassy to Jerusalem was not written in this Washington agreement. Well, Washington agreement, basically there were 2 different texts signed by Kosovo and Serbia, where these were not combined together in a joint text. So basically everyone pledged to certain things which were not the same ones. And when we came to power, we have already found this newly established embassy of Kosovo.
But Mr. Prime Minister, you could go back. You could move the embassy back if you wanted to.
This was basically a fait accompli for us.
You could move the embassy back if you wanted to.
I don't think that is useful, and recognition of Israel neither our embassy in Jerusalem are not against Palestinian people. We want to have very good relations with Palestine and good relations and more economic cooperation and cultural exchange with Israel. Because when NATO bombarded Serbia in 1999, both Israelis and Palestine protested against genocide in Kosovo and supported NATO intervention. But I wish that also Palestine supports now people of Kosovo and independence of Kosovo, and we are for a two-state solution. We think that it is possible to have good relations with the State of Israel and at the same time to have good relations with Palestinian people and denounce any kind of discrimination against them.
You're not only the Prime Minister of Kosovo, you're also a citizen of Albania, and you recently voted in the Albanian elections, which may surprise some people. You've also gone on the record saying if there was a referendum, and I know referenda aren't allowed under your constitution, you would choose for your country to become part of Albania. Explain to me why, and tell me, is that a realistic prospect?
Republic of Kosovo is the country which made me Prime Minister. I won in these elections for jobs and justice. And this is what I'm seeking for day and night, together with cabinet ministers. And on the other hand, I also have citizenship of Albania, and I use the right to vote in Albania. Kosovo and Albania are two states, but we are not two nations. And of course, affirmation of our connection, getting closer in integration and cooperation between Kosovo and Albania, I want to strengthen. I believe that this is not against anyone else, but we have very complementary economies and geographies that by being linked will help all the people on both sides of the border.
It may surprise people, though, that the Prime Minister of a country that's been fighting so hard for its full independence is floating the idea of merging with another country. Is it a realistic prospect? Can you see in your lifetime Kosovo and Albania becoming one nation?
Well, I think we are one nation but two states. However, I never saw independence of Kosovo in contrast to Albania, but always as an expression of liberation from Serbia. So we did not declare independence, so we distance ourselves from Albania, but from Serbia. On the other hand, some referendum in the future, democratic, peaceful, would also be an expression of the freedom of Kosovo, not of any kind of imposition to our country or to our people. But then again, it is not me who is going to decide about this. Not only in Kosovo and in Serbia, but everywhere citizens in Europe and in the world who have double citizenship or triple citizenship for that matter, I encourage them to vote in 2 or 3 countries whenever and wherever there are elections.
In your country, there's been one political figure who's been more dominant than anyone else over the last 2 decades, and that's the former president, former prime minister, former foreign minister Hashim Thaçi. But now he finds himself with some other key political figures in The Hague on war crimes charges. I'd like to ask you about that proceeding. Do you think it's a fair proceeding? And even though he's a political opponent, how do you see Mr. Thaçi now? President Biden, when he was Vice President Biden, called him the George Washington of Kosovo.
About these specialist chambers or special court, as we in popular manner call this half local, half international court, is not much transparent. And I did not support it when I was a member of parliament in the ranks of opposition. I believe that we need normal courts. We need normal justice. We had ICTY, we had International Court of Tribunal in Yugoslavia, Criminal Tribunal in Yugoslavia. Then we had UNMIC, we had EULEX, we had a lot of special courts. We need normal courts now. And I believe that with the strengthening of the state of Kosovo, with the vetting process among the ranks of prosecution and judges in our country, we are going to be able to address all accusations and indictments in the future. Now, specialist chambers are also something that we have found as fait accompli as a government. And we consider that Kosovo Liberation Army did not commit crimes. There could have been individuals who abused with the uniform of KLA in summer 1999 when all those massacres all over Kosovo were revealed, hundreds of massacres. But I do not consider that Kosovo Liberation Army committed war crimes or crimes against humanity.
Let me turn to the dramatic developments we've all seen in Afghanistan in recent weeks. Your country has pledged to be a staging post for some of the people leaving Afghanistan. Can you tell me about the arrangements you're making for that? Also, I believe that some of those who are going to land in Pristina have not passed their initial security screening.
First of all, it was mid-July when we started talks with our American partners about the possibility of receiving for a short period of time a number of Afghan refugees. Back then we thought that we have more time than we've gotten, and everything unraveled very fast, so we had to act fast. And we have agreed with the United States of America to receive 2,000 Afghan refugees max. At present, we have 683. And all these Afghan refugees are either special immigrant visas and P2, or citizens and family members who were NATO contractors. I went to the airport of Pristina and welcomed them. I told them that in Kosovo they will be safe. And when it comes to humanitarian issues like this one, or to our special relationship that we have with the United States, who is our most important ally and most strategic partner, we don't deliberate or ask why, we just say how. And now these hundreds of Afghan refugees will stay in Kosovo max for a period of time of 1 year. And they are located at present in Bonsteel, American US Army base, American military base, and also in dormitories of American Turkish corporation Bechtel Enka.
Some claim that America abandoned Afghanistan. Aren't you at all worried that one day the US might retreat from Kosovo as well? President Biden said he's going to end the forever wars. Well, there's still a NATO mission in Kosovo, KFOR, 3,600 troops, and the largest number are from the US.
I don't think that NATO is going to leave Kosovo, because NATO intervened here, and the mission was very clear: to liberate Kosovo so it doesn't fall back into hands of Serbia, which is very close to Russian Federation. And we know very well that one of the key reasons, perhaps the most important aspect why NATO exists, it is the danger from Russian Federation. And after NATO summit on 14th of June this year in Brussels, it is clearer than ever that NATO in the Balkans, including Kosovo, is here to stay. On the other hand, we want to join NATO. We are very well aware that Afghanistan will not join NATO. So Kosovo will join NATO, and that's why situation is completely different. We are also strengthening our own army because unfortunately Serbia is not only not recognizing our country and not showing regret for the crimes of the past, but also from time to time grouping and regrouping its military forces around our border, which they can, of course, just have a gaze at it, because definitely they will never dare to do anything similar as they've done in last century.
Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of Kosovo, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much for having me.